My daughter took my wedding ring and claimed the money my husband left behind while I was overseas. I did not learn that in a dramatic way. There was no shouting, no confession, no frantic phone call. It came quietly, the way betrayal often does in families, wrapped in familiarity and confidence, as if it were something already decided. Before any of that, before the ring disappeared and the money was spoken of as if it belonged to someone else, there was a life that felt settled. Not perfect, but steady. My husband had been gone 3 years by then. The house still carried his habits. Drawers stayed organized. Bills were paid early. Nothing extravagant, nothing careless. He had believed in order. He had believed that money was not meant to impress, only to protect. The ring was part of that order. I wore it because I always had. Not out of mourning, not to make a statement. It was simply there. The same way his chair remained at the end of the table long after no one sat in it. Some things become part of your body before you realize they are choices. My name is Ardith Caldwell. I am 66. I lived alone in Savannah, in the same house we had raised our daughter in. I had learned how to keep moving without calling it bravery. When the opportunity came to spend several months overseas consulting for a nonprofit I had worked with for years, I said yes without much hesitation. It felt practical, purposeful, something my husband would have approved of. My daughter offered to help while I was gone. She said it easily, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She would check the house, keep an eye on things, make sure nothing piled up while I was away. When she suggested holding on to a few items for safekeeping, I agreed without thinking too hard about it. I left quietly. I packed light. I did not take the ring with me. I didn't know then that leaving the ring behind would matter more than leaving the house. The work overseas had been offered months earlier, framed as advisory support for a nonprofit rebuilding local systems that had stalled after years of mismanagement. It was familiar work, quiet, necessary, the kind my husband used to call useful without being loud. I told my daughter about it over coffee, not as an announcement, just as something I was considering. She didn't look surprised. "You should go," she said right away. "You've been talking about doing something like that again." "I'd be gone a while," I said. "A few months. That's fine." She waved it off, then leaned forward. "I can manage things here." I watched her carefully. She had my husband's way of sounding decisive without sounding demanding. Manage what? Exactly. The house? Mail? Bills? Whatever comes up. She smiled, like she'd already solved a problem I hadn't fully named. "You don't need to worry about any of that while you're gone. I usually handle it myself." I said, "I know." Her tone softened. "But you don't have to this time." I hesitated longer than she probably expected. It wasn't distrust, it was habit. After my husband died, routine had become my scaffolding. Letting someone else step into it felt like loosening a joint that still held weight. She noticed the pause. "I'm not taking over," she said, "just filling in." There it was, the phrasing that made it sound temporary, harmless. She reached for her phone and scrolled. "If anything important comes in, I'll let you know. If something needs to be handled, I'll handle it for you." I looked at her then, really looked. She was grown, confident, used to making decisions in her own life. I told myself this was just an extension of that. "All right," I said. "Just the basics." "Of course." She smiled again. "Nothing big without you." I nodded, feeling something settle that I chose to call relief. I booked the flight the next day. I packed the same way I always did. Carefully, efficiently, trusting that the life I left behind would stay where it was. I told myself help was not the same thing as control. She brought it up a week before I left, standing in the doorway while I folded clothes. "Maybe you shouldn't travel with the ring," she said. Airports aren't exactly gentle. I've worn it everywhere, I replied. Nothing's ever happened to it. I know. She stepped closer. That's why I'm suggesting this. Let me keep it safe while you're gone. I held my hand still, the ring warm from my skin. It's just a ring. It's not just a ring, she said, softer now. It's Dad. And you won't forgive yourself if something happens to it. That landed. She knew where it would. She took the ring carefully, like she was doing me a favor. I'll put it somewhere secure. You won't even have to think about it. Later that evening, she brought up my husband again, this time more casually. While you're away, I should probably review some of Dad's accounts, just to make sure nothing slips through. You don't want surprises. I already went through most of it, I said. I know, but things get missed. She shrugged. I'm not changing anything. Just looking. I told myself this was what responsible adults did. I told myself grief made people careful, not greedy. I told myself she was my daughter. The ring went into her bag. I didn't ask where she planned to keep it. I didn't ask what she meant by reviewing. I didn't realize that permission sounds a lot like ownership to the wrong person. The calls started out normal. Short, because of the time difference, but warm enough. She asked if I was eating properly. I asked if the house was behaving itself. Nothing unusual. A week later, the calls got shorter. I'm between meetings. She said one night, "Can we talk later?" Later became tomorrow. Tomorrow became a message instead of a call. I mentioned a bank notice that came through late. Did you see anything come in the mail about it? It's handled, she said. Her voice was calm, almost relieved. You don't need to worry about that anymore. I paused. About what? Exactly, just things. She said, paperwork, stuff Dad left behind. I usually like to know what's being handled. I said, You're overseas. She replied, That's the point. So you don't have to think about it. Her tone had shifted, not defensive. Certain. A few days later, I asked about the ring. I hadn't planned to. The question slipped out while we were talking about something else. It's safe, she said quickly, exactly where it should be. Where is that somewhere you don't need to worry about? She laughed lightly, like I was being fussy. I let it go. I told myself distance was distorting everything, that texts always sound colder than voices, that I was tired. But the messages stayed vague. Answers arrived without details. Updates came without explanations. She sounded confident, efficient, like someone who had already decided what mattered and what didn't. I didn't confront her. I didn't accuse. I kept my voice even and my questions small. I didn't know what that was, but I knew it wasn't nothing. I arrived home late in the afternoon and let myself in the way I always had. The door opened easily. The air felt familiar. Nothing looked disturbed. That, more than anything, unsettled me. My daughter had left a note on the counter. I'll come by tomorrow, it said. No heart, no explanation. I went to the bedroom first, out of habit. I stood where I always stood when I set my bag down, then reached for my hand without thinking. The ring wasn't there. Of course it wasn't. I'd given it to her. I reminded myself of that. Slow and deliberate. As if repeating it might settle something loose inside me, I opened the drawer where I kept my papers. Everything was neat. Too neat. The folder with my husband's name on it had been moved forward, like someone had been in a hurry and wanted to look organized afterward. I checked my phone and opened the banking app. My access didn't go through. I tried again. Same message. Restricted. I sat at the edge of the bed and waited for the familiar spike of panic. It didn't come. What came instead was a thin, quiet awareness. Things had shifted while I was gone, and they had shifted without resistance. She called that evening. You made it back, she said. I did. How was the flight long? I said, I tried to check one of the accounts. I couldn't get in. That's because I consolidated some things, she replied. It was simpler. Simpler for who? For both of us, she said quickly. You don't need to deal with it now. You've just gotten back. I let the silence stretch. And the ring. Another pause. I told you it was safe. I didn't ask if it was safe. I said, I asked where it is. She exhaled. We can talk about all of this tomorrow. We can. I agreed. After the call ended, I walked through the house again. The chairs were in place. The pictures hadn't moved. Even my husband's jacket still hung where it always had. Nothing looked stolen. Everything felt claimed. She arrived the next morning like nothing had changed. Same walk through the door, same quick glance around the room, checking that everything was still where she expected it to be. You look tired, she said. Jet lag. I'm fine, I replied. Sit down. She didn't right away. She set her bag on the chair, straightened it, then finally sat across from me. Her posture was relaxed, prepared. I want to understand what you meant last night, I said, about consolidating things. She nodded, as if I'd asked something reasonable. I moved the money into an account that made more sense, fewer complications. It was inefficient the way it was. It wasn't yours to move, I said. Her smile didn't disappear. It softened. Mom, it's family money. It was your father's. I said, and now it's mine. For now, she replied gently. But you know how this works. I held her gaze. Explain it to me. She leaned back. You're 66. You don't spend much. You don't want to deal with paperwork anymore. I do. I'm just being practical. And the ring, I said. She lifted her hand slightly, like she'd been waiting for that. I kept it. You weren't using it. I felt something tighten in my chest. I wear it every day. You wore it, she corrected. Before you left. The words settled between us. I didn't take it to hurt you. She continued. I took it to protect it. Same with the money. It was always going to be mine eventually. There it was. Not anger. Not apology. Certainty. You decided that. I said. She smiled again. Wider this time. I accepted it. I let the silence do what it needed to do. I thought of my husband's hands. Careful with receipts. Careful with promises. I thought of how often he said that assuming was the fastest way to lose something. You should have talked to me, I said. There wasn't anything to talk about. She replied. This was just timing. I stood. She stayed seated, still smiling, still convinced this was a conversation she had already won. We're done for today, I said. She frowned. Just slightly, done with what I looked at her then. Really looked. And understood that the smile wasn't relief. It was ownership. That was the moment I stopped being her mother and became her obstacle. She came back that afternoon, calmer than she'd been in the morning, as if she'd spent the hours arranging her thoughts into something she could defend. I've been thinking about how to explain this better, she said, sitting across from me again. I don't want you to feel blindsided. I'm listening. I said. She took that as permission. Dad would have wanted it this way. You know he worried about things being wasted. He used to say money should move, not sit. He said it should be managed. I replied. Not claimed. That's what I'm doing. She said quickly. Managing it. She leaned forward. You don't need it like I do. You have the house. You're comfortable. I'm still building my life. I folded my hands in my lap and stayed quiet. You taught me to be practical, she went on. To plan ahead. This is me planning ahead. Her voice softened. I thought you'd understand. I watched her as she spoke. She wasn't cruel. She wasn't shaking. She was certain. That was what unsettled me most. You're not spending much anymore, she added. Dad's gone. Your needs are smaller now. My life is smaller, I said. Not my right to it. She waved that off gently. I'm not taking anything from you. I'm just stepping in. There it was again. Stepping in, filling space she'd already decided was empty. She smiled, not sharply, but with reassurance, like she was comforting a child. This doesn't have to be a fight. It's just how things end up. I let her talk until she ran out of reasons. I didn't interrupt. I didn't correct her I didn't explain what she didn't know yet. She stood to leave, satisfied, certain she'd made her case. She thought certainty was the same thing as truth. After my husband died, there was a stretch of time when every decision felt heavier than it should have. Not because I was incapable, but because grief makes even simple choices feel permanent. I learned quickly that if I waited for certainty, nothing would ever get done. So I did what he would have done. I organized. I met with an attorney I'd known for years. Someone my husband trusted because he asked questions before giving answers. I brought every document I had. Accounts, policies, titles. I told him I wanted protection, not drama. This isn't about cutting anyone out, I said. It's about keeping things intact. He nodded. Then we build something that holds. The assets were placed into an estate and a trust, structured so no one could move money on impulse or entitlement. Access required conditions, time, verification, intent. It wasn't complicated, but it was firm. The money could support a future, but it couldn't be grabbed in a moment of certainty. I signed everything slowly. I read every page. I remembered my husband at the kitchen table, glasses low on his nose, saying that the fastest way to lose control was to assume you had it. When it was done, I felt lighter, not relieved, prepared. I never explained the details to my daughter, not because I was hiding anything, but because there was nothing to explain. She wasn't involved. She didn't need to be. Love didn't require disclosure. When she talked about consolidating accounts, about simplifying, about stepping in, she spoke from a place that didn't include facts. She saw money sitting still and mistook that for neglect. She saw my quiet and thought it meant absence. What she never understood was that there was no account she could truly touch, no transfer she could complete, no decision she could finalize. Everything she thought she'd claimed was layered behind safeguards designed long before she smiled and said it was handled. The money was never hers to take, only hers to misunderstand. The first call came from the bank 2 days later. A woman introduced herself by name, calm and professional, as if she were calling about a routine matter. We've identified irregular access attempts, she said. The accounts are being restored to their prior state. How long will that take, I asked. It's already in progress, she replied. The trust structure prevented any permanent movement. I thanked her and hung up. I didn't feel victorious, I felt steady. My daughter called that evening. Her voice sounded different, tighter. Did you talk to the bank? Yes. I said. They froze everything. She snapped. I can't access any of it. You were never supposed to. I said. There was a pause. You didn't have to do this. I didn't do anything, I replied. I let things return to where they belonged. She exhaled sharply. You went behind my back. You went ahead of me. I said, there's a difference. The ring came back the next morning, delivered in a small padded envelope. No note, no apology, just the weight of it in my palm, familiar and unchanged. I slid it onto my finger and felt the quiet click of it settling where it had always been. She stopped coming by after that. When she did call, it was brief, practical, like speaking to someone you no longer expected to agree with you. A letter arrived from her attorney, thin and careful, outlining positions and intentions. My attorney responded just as carefully. Boundaries were restated. Access was denied. Nothing dramatic, nothing cruel. We did not argue anymore. There was nothing left to argue about. The system had spoken in language neither of us could bend. I saw her once at the grocery store. She nodded. I nodded back. That was all. The house remained quiet. The accounts settled into their intended structure. The distance between us grew without announcement, like something accepted rather than fought. Love had failed to protect us, but systems never promise love. The ring stayed on my hand after that. Not because it meant what it used to, but because it marked a line I hadn't drawn clearly enough before. When my daughter finally came by to pick up the last of the things she'd left behind, she noticed it right away. "You put it back on," she said. "Yes," I replied. She hesitated. "I thought, after everything," I said evenly. "I decided what still belonged to me." She nodded once. There was no apology waiting behind her eyes, only acceptance. Thin and reluctant, she left without another word, and I didn't follow her to the door. Motherhood teaches you how to give without counting. It doesn't always teach you when to stop. I had confused love with access, patience with permission. Losing my husband had narrowed my world, but it hadn't erased my judgment. I had simply stopped trusting it. I spoke with my attorney one last time that week. He asked if I wanted to revise anything. "No," I said. "I want things to stay exactly where they are." "That's usually the hardest choice," he said. "It's also the clearest," I replied. Life didn't change dramatically after that. I still woke early. I still paid my bills. I still lived in the same house in Savannah, with its quiet rooms and familiar silences. The difference was internal. I no longer explained my boundaries to make them softer. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever mistaken love for obligation, take a moment to like this. Leave a comment or subscribe. Someone else may need to hear that choosing yourself doesn't make you cruel. I didn't take anything from my daughter. I simply stopped letting her take from me. Some things aren't reclaimed in anger. They're reclaimed in silence.